Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
It is July 22nd in the year of our Lord 2020, 4 years before the great robot invasion.
Yes, very excited about that. And this is episode 64.
Yeah.
And if we wouldn't get in trouble with Michael Jackson's estate, we could play the Beatles song When I'm 64 in the background.
We could do that. But out of our great fear of litigation, we shall avoid it.
Yes.
Speaking of, this is just an aside, speaking of robot invasion, I saw that scientists, these articles are, I always imagine they're puffed up, but they used light for coding purposes instead of using electronics, and they're able to make AI that thinks 100 times faster. So that plus robot birds equals robot uprising.
QAnon, right?
Yeah. So I think we just need to monitor that.
Sounds good. And if you can get light inside yourself, you can cure COVID too.
That is, the president said that, so it's true.
That's right. So it must be true.
We haven't introduced ourselves the last couple of times.
That's true.
So I don't want to take for granted that everyone knows who we are. So
right.
Good morning, everybody. This is Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
Yeah, and I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And today, my little pun title is the Mural Imagination.
Yes.
Because we're going to talk about a controversial mural that came. This happened 2 weeks ago, so it's old news, but it happened while we were on break.
Right.
Or the news story broke. And so we're going to circle back to it because I think it's an important story for helping us understand some of the problems we're having as a society, especially with evangelicals. So,
right. Yeah. So we want to circle back to a theological topic. And this is a great one that integrates theology and activism and all that good stuff.
All the things.
So there was a mural once upon a time. 2 weeks ago, there was a mural.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to show the mural?
Why don't I pull that up while you keep talking? Because I didn't think that far ahead.
Oh, okay.
So,
So this mural, South Minneapolis is one of the few remaining Kmarts. You guys may remember Kmart. It was a store. There aren't many of them left. But South Minneapolis has one of them, and it sits at the and it actually divides Nicollet Avenue. So any of you that are familiar with Nicollet Avenue, it's right kind of in the middle. There's a huge parking lot. It is in the area where a lot of the uprisings occurred. So it's very near the Wells Fargo Bank that was burned, and kind of in between the whole place that the uprisings were going on. And one day, a mural appeared on the wall of Kmart.
Yep.
And I can keep talking until it's going to appear.
I got it ready.
You got it ready. Okay, so the mural appeared, and here it is.
Here it is. Now, there's a lot going on here, and just I wasn't paying attention to everything you were saying, Dan, because I was looking for this. But part of the thing is that local activists, artists, petitioned the Kmart wanting to do some art on there, and they refused because they were afraid of doing anything too political. And then the owners of that space were approached by this pastor, Peter Wohler, who I know, and he said, well, we're going to do stuff that's not political. It'll bring healing to the community. And this was kind of the central piece to that mural project. And you can see there's this loving, gentle police officer hugging this person of color, and
Well, and then could you go back to the picture, because there's a few other layers there, in case people weren't noticing.
Yeah, just a second. I got to reopen it now.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Just now people get to see how slow I am at technology sometimes. There we go.
Yeah, and so the other piece to this is that you've got you still have the riot police in the background there. And then you also have a black person taking a photograph of this wonderful encounter. And so, of course, the police still have all their equipment, they have their uniform. And now, instead of killing the black person, they're hugging them. Yes.
Well,
So
there's also other interesting things about this. Most of these folks in the background have their COVID masks on, but this loving, gentle officer removed it.
right.
Maybe
Right.
for artistic purposes, but I mean, it's just this. Yeah, we know what this is communicating, right? This is communicating this idea of racial reconciliation. That look, there are two sides of this tense situation: the police
Right.
and black people. And they need to set their differences aside, come together, and experience healing.
Right. And hug it out.
Yeah, and obviously, there's even the people who made the mural probably recognize there's more nuance than that. I want to believe that, but it still communicates this idea that these are two contrasting forces that need to be reconciled one with another, relationally. And there's some truth to that, but the reality is that in that situation, the mural should show a picture of a police officer. If the goal is to depict the gospel, it should show a picture of a police officer setting aside weapons, taking his badge off, and then maybe like crying to a black protester. Maybe that could lead to hugs. I don't know. Who am I to say? But this is just this sort of like, let's deal with social complex issues through two people on different sides hugging it out. That is not the gospel in this situation at all. In fact, it does harm. So this is where it led. Okay, so then this mural showed up. People noticed, hey, what the hell is this mural? This is horrible. And so some activists said, like, we're gonna paint over it. To hell with this. We can't have that. And so they approached the space to try to paint over it. And the pastor, he was not the artist, the person who commissioned the artist or was kind of leading the artist, apparently stood between the would-be vandals and the mural, and they hit him and spray painted on him. And so I think he feels a little traumatized. I'm not exactly condoning hitting and spray painting someone, but if one were to spray paint and hit someone, this would be the sort of situation where it would kind of make some sense to me. It's complex, but so this whole thing, he still does not recognize that this could have caused harm. And that's, to me, the theological question. I understand how many within the Christian world would see a mural like this as a reflection of the gospel. But when after being called out by activists for causing harm, not recognizing how this could cause harm shows a deep problem in our moral and mural imaginations.
Right.
So that's where my pun came in.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, not only was this mural supposed to be about reconciliation, but specifically this was talked about in terms of loving your enemy.
Yeah, that's the name of the
famous
piece, Love Your Enemies.
Yeah. Love your enemies.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, we coming at this, I mean, the community that did this, as Mark mentioned, right, is this evangelical community. This particular pastor considers himself apparently to be sort of radical within the evangelical community. And right, so here's the image that comes to mind. And this, I don't know if this is where it first appeared, but the artist put this up on her Instagram feed, got just sort of annihilated. And again, many of the very prominent Black activists in Minneapolis then picked this up and just said, this is horrible, right? This is hurtful to us. This is exactly not what the gospel is about, right? This highly simplistic idea of just And again, the individualist versus the systemic, this idea that this individual cop hugs this individual black person and that makes everything okay. And then a black person takes a photo of it and feels good about it. This is hugely problematic. And
Yes.
right. And the people from this community are having a hard time seeing this, which is also hugely problematic. And great comments are pouring in.
Well, just to add some texture, and I'll probably get into more of this texture, leading up to this mural project. So when things were happening, things were intense. This pastor, and this is why I'm talking publicly about this. I've gotten crap for talking about this publicly, as though I'm somehow throwing a fellow brother in Christ under the bus. But as this stuff happened, when I was down there and buildings were starting to burn and there was looting, and I was there for all that stuff, I was getting condemned by this pastor for not taking a public stand against rioting and the looters, to not publicly condemn them, and he called me a moral coward. Now, see, I understand how you disagree with that stuff, but like this sort of anger about this. Okay, so then you fast forward another week. He's predominantly white church. He's a white pastor leading a peace march through the war-torn area. Again, in his mind, seems very Christian. In my mind, it's like it's not your place exactly. And then on top of that, they were fundraising through that protest or that march. So there's just layers of disengagement that are happening. And so to me, it's fitting that this mural is actually a mural of a picture of an event, because it shows the lack of connection to these things happening. Anyways, so a little bit more context for folks.
Yeah.
Comments coming in. Kathleen writes, reminding me of the story of the prodigal son, with the police officers being presented as the loving father. Very disturbing. That's right. The face we see is of the police officer, who in the picture looks very white, though the muralist and pastor involved are trying to articulate that it's our chief of police, who is not a white man. So it's interesting.
I hadn't heard that. It's pretty hard to tell.
Chief Orlando. Isaac recognizes great humor, apparently. Nice pun.
Yeah.
Thank you. Angel writes, saludos, amigos. Good to see you back. It's more than tone deaf. I can imagine an overly problematic picture of white Jesus hugging Caesar. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's right. So it's as you said, it's more than tone deaf, because this is being presented not just as, oh, wouldn't this be nice for our society if this happened, which might be the tone deaf aspect of a bad way to solve social problems. But this is being presented as a theology, right? This is being presented, right, as this is the gospel. Mm-hmm. And that those in power retain their power, and those who are being pressed just get a hug, and nothing else changes. And that is not the gospel. That is not the gospel at all, but it very much is the gospel within particularly the white evangelical community in America right now. And it has largely been the gospel everywhere around the world that Christianity and empire merge into one. That becomes the gospel. The people in power are, as long as they're nice to the oppressed, they get their power and privilege, and the oppressed get their nice crumbs. Mm-hmm. Right? And that is not at all what Jesus was talking about.
No, and this is, so after I started talking about this on Facebook, I had a friend of mine really lay into me and accuse me of being very evangelical, because from his perspective, my condemnation of this mural falls into black and white dualistic thinking that is common among evangelicals. I talk about this all the time. I'm like, you can't throw everything that's politically radical into some sort of binary, where then the person who sees this as harsh places themselves in a non-dualistic mind at the middle. as a moderate white,
Right.
which is, this is something I criticize all the time, this move that happens where somehow you get these white, extremely white, in every negative sense of the word white, disinterested, detached, middle-class consciousness people who think because of that detachment that they're non-dualistic in their thinking. And then they use that to judge angry blackness on the streets, right? This happens all the time. And so in this,
Well, and it's going on right now in a big way around this whole cancel culture thing, right? I'm
yes,
seeing article after article from these white professorial types of, oh, we all just need to get along, and don't use words like hate, and if you're angry, that's bad. We have to be nicer. Christianity calls us to be nice, and
yes.
it's a
We need to
big thing.
cultivate the marketplace of ideas so that creativity may flourish. Yeah. And so this idea that the gospel, like, so this is the thing, like, this being presented the gospel as oppressive. And so I'm going to say that as starkly as I can. And I don't think I'm being dualistic here or even evangelical about it. It's oppressive because it does not recognize the power imbalance in any real way, shape, or form. And this is the sort of thing like was Oscar Romero, what would have been better than him like taking a stand? He should have just tried to hug some of those. He should have loved his enemies instead of continuing to publicly challenge them and call them to repentance to the point where he was assassinated. He really just brought it on himself for being so adversarial.
Hashtag death squads have nice people.
Yeah. Hashtag death squad lives matter.
There we go. All right, the comments are flying fast and furious. Let's get some up
Max
there.
writes, in this mural's mindset, the two races are black and cop. So damaging to imagine police as a natural, essential identity. Yes.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's a great point. And this, the way you love your enemies, that's a police officers, you call them to repentance. It's my favorite little one-liner I like to throw out. It's my theology on this is fuck the police, love the police officer. Because those police officers are enemies that need love, but you don't love them by saying, well, you're doing your best. I don't want to be so harsh. Laura writes, the thoughts around Christianity and empire are so important.
Thank you. So we missed a bunch, Mark. There's this one from Isaac up above.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks for drawing my attention to that. Isaac writes, reminds me of the photo of the white cop hugging the black kid during yes, exactly, during the Ferguson uprising, and how much white folks loved that photo.
Yep.
It's like also after Ferguson, all of a sudden you had cops playing basketball. I was at a Caribou Coffee, and a police officer got in line behind us. And he said, hey, is it okay if I give your kid something? I'm like, what? And Jonas is like, sure. I'm like, okay. So he goes back to us, and he has stuffed animals in the trunk of his squad car. He's giving out. And like, clearly this is not something that cops always do. This was post-Ferguson, is maybe around Jamar Clark, stuff happening in Minneapolis. And so this is a form of soft policing. And white people love this. Like, oh, look, stuffed animals. Susan writes, I have mixed feelings about this, I guess. The original mural may have been disturbing, but as with all art, a source for reflection and discussion. How should we censor the art? Is that the best approach? Yeah. I'm okay with censoring art. Like, it's like Confederate statues are art.
Yeah. So, this, I appreciate this comment because it brings up this issue of free speech and censorship, which is getting tossed around a lot. And so the first thing I want to start with is that the First Amendment says nothing about free speech between private individuals or in private settings and situations. And it's being used for that a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's not what it's about at all. So the First Amendment simply talks about government censorship of speech. And so really that is non-applicable in most of the situations that we're talking about. The other thing I think is very important for us to realize, and particularly those of us with privilege, is that and this really applies to the whole issue of this around professors in schools, and should we be, quote, censoring professors? There are a limited number of professorships. There are a limited number of public spaces. And again, the issue is who controls these things? Who controls what art is seen in a public space? Who controls who is the professor? And the people in power want to have all of those spaces and all of that speech conform to the structures that maintain that power.
That's right.
Right. There's only a limited number of Kmart wall spaces. Right? There are not an infinite number of Kmarts.
And it was already censored in their decision. They were already censoring in their decision to not show political speech from activists. And so then they agreed to allow a white minister who represented a fairly successful evangelical church in the city to display art that they deemed was appropriate.
Right. And so that is a socio-political and theological act that the people who are the most impacted by the oppressive structures were horrified by. And so to me, changing that and getting rid of it is not censorship. It is actively taking a stance that we are going to try to overthrow and transform these power structures. And we're going to have a different group of people and a different sensibility being shown in our public spaces. And that, to me, is absolutely essential, healthy debate. And it's what Jesus did all the time. Right? Jesus, again, the powers that be in his time said, well, you don't touch women. Right? So that's a censorship. That is a power decision. And Jesus was like, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to display a different sort of behavior. And so again, to Mark's point, I mean, Jesus took sides all the time. Right? Jesus was not, hashtag the nice middle. Jesus, again, it's like Pharisees' lives matter. That was not Jesus's thing.
No,
and
he
the
wasn't
gospel
going around guillotining Pharisees either. So it's not like I think he's full on left militant in every way that you could imagine that, but he's definitely not some sort of soft, mushy middle.
Yeah. All right, let's keep rolling.
Yeah. I mean, if we get time, I want to circle back to the question of censorship. Let's see. Angel writes, it's ironic, the violent imagery that a peace march essentially conveys.
Yes.
I mean, there's power in a march like that. Max writes, police as identity makes the only possible outcome reconciliation. We can't just get rid of these people, as opposed to it being class career that can be abolished. Amen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the great contradiction in saying blue lives matter, is that there's no such thing as a blue life, unless you're a Smurf, and then those do matter.
Yeah, we've talked about that a great deal, about that one of the tragedies of our time right now is that we seem to be incapable of imagining a society that is safe without armies. And if you don't believe the police has become an army, just take a look at some of the pictures of Portland right now. So,
Anil writes, Christian and empire merge into one. Love how this adds up as American evangelicalism, U.S. American evangelicalism. Yeah, it's imperial Christianity. And Laura writes, the good, bad binary thinking and newspeak is such a white violence tool. Gus writes, I think when you talk about this white middle class detachment, there's another side which is quote unquote objective, way that the news, that to take a side is biased is somehow the worst thing, and that being unbiased is even possible. How is that the unbiased just happens to always land in the pro-market, pro-location? That's right. You see those charts all the time. I see that there's those charts that show that plot media, and they have like Democracy Now! Is a great example. They put far left bias, but then high in accuracy. Right. So I'll often point this out, like when people say, oh, you can't trust anything from Democracy Now! And I'm like, look, on this weird, moderate way of slicing and dicing things, they're seen as highly accurate. In other words, they don't make crap up, and then they have an analysis. Their analysis is not less valid than the middle, which is like CNN. I'm like, that's the idea that somehow they're less biased is ridiculous, but people buy into this all the time.
Yeah. I mean, Gus, your point is right on, right? That this modernity notion of objectivity and unbiasedness then always becomes defined as the way that those in power wish to define it. And again, in Jesus's time, this was the Pharisees who were the keeper of the law, right? Well, I mean, what was unbiased and what was obviously true and neutral was the law and their interpretation of the law. And anybody that went against that was taking up some kind of satanic, literally, I mean, Jesus was called satanic position. And in this case, we don't use that language. We say that they're being thugs and being irrational and being terrible looters and being these other leftist black and white thinkers and Antifa, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, and it's ridiculous. It's that the view of the norm is just as biased, if not, in fact, often way more biased than the supposedly biased positions that are being railed against.
To me, this ties into all the different things that happening right now that we could be talking about, like this mural, the person behind the mural, who was calling me to take a stand against the protests, who's also upset about Antifa. This idea that that really the people disrupting the peace are the culprits, and they need to just let go and love their enemies. That feeds into this narrative of, like, I've been looking at different religious Facebook groups and the way that different people are responding to the disappearing of protesters from unmarked federal vehicles in Portland, and now that's expanding to other cities. They think, well, those people are brought it on themselves. What did they expect?
Yep.
And again, it's like problematizing the conflict causer, the person who points out the conflict, rather than the person who's using crushing oppressive violence, which are the police and the federal government in this situation.
Yeah, and we can't just ignore the what I would say is a fairly insane idea that we are horribly angry and practicing some sort of moral cowardice by not being outraged that one Wells Fargo bank burns, when Wells Fargo is sponsoring the burning of the entire planet. I mean, those are not equal things. Those are not equal things. And American evangelicalism doesn't even want to say that global warming exists most of the time, and they certainly don't have any problem with the capitalist structure that is causing massive material destruction every single day. Why are we not outraged at that? Well, it's because, again, we've merged our religious sensibilities with the sensibilities and priorities of the empire.
Now, this is okay, just to channel my inner moderate evangelical for a second. The response is, Dan, why can't we be against both? Why can't we be against these people who are looting and against Wells Fargo, contributing to deforestation and all sorts of other? We can be against it at all. Now, my problem with that is that you're not. People who say that are never.
Well, right. I was going to say,
they're never against it all, because it's usually the way that people who are generally disengaged try to justify their disengagement as though it's a morally excellent stance. Mm-hmm. And this is, Howard Zinn's great one-liner: you can't be neutral on a moving train. If you think being a pacifist and lover of humanity means that you can just kind of not be involved in struggles except for when you can just call people towards civility and kindness, then you are, if you have social power, you are an oppressor. Like, you're contributing to the weight of oppression by not speaking out against oppression and by morally equivocating looters and someone who deforests the Amazon for economic gain. You're making a moral equivalency, and that to me is violent.
Yeah.
Way more violent than me running through a Target and stealing corn dogs.
For which you should be publicly whipped.
Hypothetically speaking.
And here's Catherine at 10:30. Woohoo! Yes. All right.
Catherine writes, the image of white Jesus hugging enemies would be problematic enough, but it strikes me that I have never seen that as art. Have you? What does it reveal about white Christians that one would paint a black Christ hugging their violent oppressor, but white Jesus is only shown hugging politicians or kids or the repentant meek and being long-suffering about sinners?
Yeah. You know, what this reminds me of is this awesome talk that I heard once by a wonderful South American woman theologian who made the very interesting observation as she was talking about the oppressive nature of the Catholic Church in South America, that she said, you know, the people in South America, they only see two images of Jesus. One as a helpless baby, and two as a dead person on the cross. And they never see him as an empowered man. And I thought that that was a brilliant assessment and observation. And she talked about how what that shows you is then, you know, your Christianity is never about being empowered to make your life better and to overthrow the oppressive structures.
No.
And so, again, getting back to Susan's question about censorship, this is why it's very important, the images that we see and cultivate and the images that we don't want to see and we would rather spray paint over.
Yeah, and then who do we, like, we don't, when someone spray paints over graffiti, we don't consider that censorship because we've bought into these ideas of power, which are represented through ownership of property. Which already, like, you get to the fact that Kmart owner, the owner of this Kmart, which they bought from the city of Minneapolis for a sweet deal a long time ago, and it's a politically controversial decision that happened. The fact that they have the power to decide what art is displayed, multiply that times 1 million, and that's what you have in the United States of America all the time with what gets represented.
Last couple comments.
No, we jumped over Gus real quick. He said, the cops are disturbing the peace. Every night, have friends who are downtown here in Portland every night. It's not the protesters who are throwing the first punch.
Yeah. And you know, this is something that people have got to understand. The police are instigating the violence in all these situations, and when you have
every time I've ever been in these situations,
and the few protests that have happened in these various spots when the police have not shown up, there's never any violence, and there's never any Antifa. And if you want to hear a brilliant solution to that, read my latest Facebook post. My son Max has solved the Antifa problem.
Once and for all.
Go there and check it out. All right, last few comments.
All right, it's heavy. A colonizing empire has been ultra effective in their use of propaganda from their most effective societal outlets, media, education, and religion. We can't be accountable for one another. We need Big Brother to always step in, meaning the justification for militarism.
Yeah,
that's right. Kathleen writes, I fear that people are so upset with the idea of having their ideas challenged that they will accept fascism to preserve a false peace.
Yes.
That's what has happened. And it's happening even now, like that. I mean, I could go full rage Mark, but where you don't have enough time to unleash. But the people that I know who get more upset about the specter of Antifa, which is almost entirely fabricated bullshit, more upset about that than these, and they're upset about Trump too, but as long as it's peacefully, quietly fascistic, they're okay. This is how it happens. Susan writes, Pilsen neighborhood in Chicago for amazing murals and graffiti art. Next time.
Graffiti art is awesome. So, Laura ends with a wow.
With a wow.
Okay, well, thank you. So this has been great. Again, awesome engagement, interaction. We will be back tomorrow, and then also on Friday, we're going to have guests again. We're going to bring Max and Sarah on from Colorado. They've been really involved with a lot of the protests there, and have some great data and information about really creative organizing in terms of addressing the pressure points of the different systems in our society. So that'll be fun to get an on-the-ground report from the mountain state. But then meanwhile, we'll be back tomorrow with something else awesome that we don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, it'll be mind blowing. See you
All
tomorrow.
right. Bye.